Man, I love that song, guys. Welcome to day 2 of Mainframe Comic-Con, broadcasting live from right here, Chicago Comics, in the heart of the Windy City, guys. Before we get to our first guest, we got a bevy of amazing guests. It's hitherto undreamt of. The level of amazing celebrity talent we got joining us all day here at Mainframe Comic-Con. Before we get to our first guest, I just want to remind you, Mainframe Comic-Con is a 100% for charity telethon, guys. So take a second, head on over to mainframecomiccon.com. Click that donate button. 100% of the proceeds are going to go directly to the Hero Initiative and the American Red Cross COVID-19 Relief Fund. So let's not waste any more time, guys. Let's jump right into our first guest. You know him as Kevin Smith, Mr. Kevin Smith. How's it going, man?
Good morning. How are you, man? Happy Comic-Con or Happy Con. I guess we can't say Con because that's owned by another property, but Happy Mainframe, Happy MF Comic-Con, which actually sounds more metal.
Yeah, exactly. It's the worst place to get stuck on a Sunday than in the middle of a comic book shop. We're having a blast here. Well, I've been asking all of our guests so far sort of how they've been handling their social quarantine. You have to be having a harder time with it. You just got off 6 to 8 months of living on the road, pumping the Reboot Road show. What's it like going from life on the road to life in the house? How's it treating you?
It's only 4 months, man. But 8 months makes me sound like a rock star. It was 4 months on the road. We did from October to December, and then we were down for Christmas, and then January through February. Our last day of the tour was February 26th in New Orleans, the day after Mardi Gras. So we were in all the places where there have been like huge flare-ups, oddly enough, and stuff. Yet none of us who were on tour, and there was only 3 of us, sometimes 4 when Jason was there, none of us got sick. So at the end of the tour, I was coming home. I had a few days, and then I was going to go back out into the world to South by Southwest. They had there's a documentary my friend made about me called Clerk that was debuting there. Then I was going to go back east to do some shows and stuff. And then suddenly everything started getting canceled. And I'll be honest with you, like, as I was coming home from tour, I was like, man, if I just had like 1 month to just sit around the house and like catch up on writing, get my eating straight, go hiking every day, like, oh, it'd be so perfect. And then that happened. So in the midst of all this, I know like it's a bad reason, but like I've welcomed the opportunity to just be home, man. And it's allowed me to get to some writing. So I finished writing the Mallrats sequel, Twilight of the Mallrats. And then this morning and yesterday, since, I'm waiting on feedback from the people that I sent that script to, I was like, you know what, I'm going to dive back into the Moose Jaw script. So it's been like 4 years since I touched that. So now I'm kind of diving back into that as well. Just trying to make use of the time, man. There's, it's of course, we all like to be able to do whatever we want to do, walk around, do whatever, leave, being American is all about, I'm going to get in my car and do whatever the fuck. But, in this time where, unprecedented time, as they keep saying, where we're living in a moment of history, there's not much we could do except take it in, watch a bunch of programming, which is like what I've been doing for a while, eat, which I've been doing a bunch of, or try to be productive. So I'm trying to be productive, use the time to get some words on the page, because one day they might let us go back to work. And if that's the case, I want to be ready to go with something.
Man, you mentioned Twilight of the Mallrats. We just saw that announcement on your Instagram. I believe it was a Friday night or maybe Saturday morning. Huge. I mean, we've been talking about that since 2017. Where are we at, man? Like, let's dive into Twilight of the Mallrats.
It is. I'm apologizing. I'm obsessed with my hat because I don't have my real hat. I grabbed the hat that I go hiking in, and it's smaller.
I thought that looked familiar.
I feel weird with that. In any event, I had written a script for a Mallrats sequel a couple of years. God, it looks so crooked. I look like I'm like trying to put on attitude like this, but where's my head crooked?
It looks good.
Does it? Well, not good, but in my head, I look better. But in any event, I tried to write a Mallrats sequel years ago called what was it called? Mallrats 2: Die Hard in a Mall. And it was predicated on an old idea I had back in like 1995 when we were making the original Mallrats. And Jim Jacks, the producer, was like, you better have a sequel ready to go because this movie could be a hit. And I said, I got one ready to go. He said, what is it? I said, Mallrats 2: Die Hard in a mall. And he's like, oh, that's perfect, because they were making a bunch of Die Hard knockoffs at that point. So a couple of years ago, my friend Jim Jacks, that guy who was the producer, he passed away. He's the guy that introduced me to Stan. He's the guy that got Stan into Mallrats. Jim Jacks knew Stan. I had written a scene for a comic book guru that Brody would speak to. And when Jim read the script, he was like, who's this meant to be? And I was like, well, in the real world, it would be like a Stan Lee. And he goes, why don't you just write it for Stan Lee? And I was like, well, I don't know Stan Lee. He's like, well, I do. And I was like, Hollywood is good. These fuckers know each other. So I through Jim, you know, Mallrats became reality, and he was like partners in crime with me and Scott Mosier and putting that movie together and stuff. One of us, like, even though he was way older than us, he was like 50 and we were like in our late 20s. He was one of these cats in the business that, going years back, believed in the comic book movie, because Jim grew up reading comics, and that was why he knew Stan. He had worked at Universal for years as an exec, and he ran a company called Alphaville with his partner Sean Daniel. They did Dazed and Confused, they did Tremors, they did Tombstone and stuff. So he knew Stan, because when Jim wasn't from Hollywood or anything, I think he was from Virginia, and he was meant to be an engineer, but he aggregated into the movie business because he was a big fan. When he got out here, he would take Stan out to lunch once a month, because Jim loved comics as a kid. And he was just like, why isn't this guy's universe? Why all his movies? How come they're not making? He's got to be a resource worth tapping. Plus, he just liked hearing old Stan and Jack stories and Stan talking about the bullpen. So he would take him out all the time, hoping like, yeah, maybe one day something will come of this or something like that. And what came of it was him going like, oh, this kid I'm making a movie with, it's set in comics, you're a comic book guy, brought us all together. So when Jim passed away a couple of years ago, I was like, I'm going to finally make that movie in Jim's memory. And I wrote the script for a very different Mallrats sequel, Mallrats 2, which more closely resembles what Jay and Silent Bob reboot became, because I literally stole the third act from that old Mallrats script and put it into Reboot when I was writing Reboot, man. I was like, well, this script's never going to happen, but there's some good shit in it, including like Iron Bob. So I'm going to take that and use that as the third act for Jay and Silent Bob Reboot, change names and shit like that, but boom, it won't be wasted. So I was starting to hack up that script for parts and stuff. And I realized too that like, that version of a Mallrats sequel, as much as I loved it, because it literally was just like terrorists come and take over the mall and Brody has to do John McClane. And, you know, they were Canadian terrorists and shit like that. So it's goofy as fuck, but like I had a blast doing it. Problem is, if you walked into a movie theater and that was the Mallrats sequel and you're like, what does this have to do with Mallrats? Mallrats was literally a movie about two dudes bombing around in the mall who get broken up with, and then they get to go back out with their girlfriends at the end. Like, it, even in an escalation like that as a sequel wouldn't make sense. Made more like sense in the world of Jay and Silent Bob Reboot, because Strike Back was a little more antic. But even though there's some like heightened reality to Mallrats, it is pretty straightforward day in the life movie. So I put that one to the side. And then when, it didn't really matter because nobody wanted to make it. I was trying to make Mallrats, that version of Mallrats, with Universal. They had no interest in doing it. Then we tried to do it with Universal Television. And we went to 3 places like Netflix, Hulu, and I forget the other place. And each time, man, it was Showtime. I sat down at Showtime to pitch. Because I remember I got real emotional crying about Jim Jackson. I was like, this is probably not a smart way to start a pitch. So, and especially for a comedy, no less. So after pitching 3 places for the Mallrats series, every time you walked in the room, the young execs were like, oh, I loved Mallrats. I loved Mallrats as a kid. I used to watch it all the time. And then you're like, great, well, here's Mallrats 2. And all of them just like, oh no. Yeah, like, that's Mallrats 2? Oh my God. And so it never really went anywhere. So I put that to the side. I got frustrated because I was like, well, if what with Universal was lovely. They, when I brought in the script, I was like, I want to do Mallrats 2 here. They were like, we own Mallrats 1. Like, it's not a huge title in their catalog. It wasn't Jaws, wasn't American Pie.
We didn't.
in my world, Mallrats is huge. With my fans, Mallrats is huge. But in Universal, they literally had no idea that it was theirs. And so when I gave them the script, they were like, this is Universal, man. And I'll tell you something right now. This script is neither fast nor furious. So like they had no interest in making Jay and Silent Bob reboot. They had no interest in making, Mallrats. Later on, Universal came in on Jay and Silent Bob reboot and took international. So they paid for half the movie and had it overseas, released it everywhere that wasn't America and stuff. So at that point, I was working with a guy named Jasper, who was our boss at Universal. And he was like, we had this meeting. He came out to watch the flick and stuff at my house. And then we went to grab lunch. And he was like, movie turned out great. Jay and Silent Bob reboot. He's like, movie turned out great. Go figure. In this real like fucking surprised way. So he was like, what do you want to do next? We like working with you cats. You're on time. You pay your bills. Like everything's great. What do you want to do? Like, you got any ideas? And I said, there is a movie I would like to make that you guys have. And he goes, well, write up a 2-pager and let's get to work. And so that's when I went back in on a Mallrats sequel that had to more closely resemble the first Mallrats. So Gone is Mallrats 2, Die Hard in the Mall. As of December, mid-December, right after Christmas, I started writing Twilight of the Mallrats. And I finished it on Thursday, Friday, and had a blast. It's funny. It's sweet. It's like it's set against the mallpocalypse. Like mall culture was already dying before the outbreak and before, the pandemic. And now post-pandemic, they say malls are going to be in a real bad way and start closing left and right. So suddenly that gets woven into the story. At one point you're like, well, do you want to bring up COVID in the movie? Because it's a movie and isn't that where people go to escape? But this is not even a generation defining moment. This is a history making moment. You're never going to be able to make some kind of movie set in reality without some sort of reference to or post COVID kind of notion in a movie, even if nobody has a conversation remember the COVID, people in masks, whether or not people will be shaking hands in the future. Clearly this is impacting. So as you're writing a story that you hope to tell in the future, you also have to pull in those details from the present. And one of my friends, Nate, read the script and he was just it threw me that I ran into COVID in the script. He's going, but I guess it makes sense. And I was like, I don't think anyone's ever going to be able to not address it in media in the future. In fact, it'll probably be in everything for a while because we're all just coming through it. Think of how many quarantine movies folks are going to make if they're not making them already while locked up in their houses and stuff, because it's a universal experience now that we all share. That's what pop culture references are, man. That's why you could drop a reference to Iron Man and in your movie and people are like, yeah, we all know that. Corona and this quarantine is now known by everybody. You don't even have to know Marvel movies to know that reference. So it's a reference like sex. It's a reference like death. It's a reference like being born. It's now a universal experience. It's gotta weave its way into the work. I imagine it certainly wove its way into mine. And that's not saying that everything I write now is going to be you got to talk about it. But this is the first thing that I was writing, and presumably the first thing I would make if we ever are allowed to go back to work. It's set in a mall, which, malls are dead right now. But for our purposes in the movie, there is a crowd in that mall. And we don't even know if you'll be able to shoot a crowd or something like that. So maybe that gets changed as well for a socially distancing crowd within the mall. Who knows? But you can't just assume that everything's going to look the way it did before this all happened. So it started weaving its way into the work, man. But I love the script. I had such a good time writing it, and it is 180 degrees from the Mallrats 2 Die Hard in the Mall thing, but very, very on point for, that was the thing. I became obsessed with these movies are, I view them differently than other people. They're like my kids, but at the same time, now as I get older, I can play with them in different ways. Years after we did a Clerks 2. So you get to take those characters into a different place in their lives. And most times when you make a sequel, it's usually right after the success of the first one, and you're capitalizing on that and trying to make as much money as possible. I make sequels years after it's marketable and, doesn't really help the cause at all. And is almost like restarting an engine and trying to start everything up over again. But for me, like going back and playing with Brody again, like which we did a little bit in Jay and Silent Bob reboot. But having Brody now firmly like spending 90 minutes with him, with his point of view of this world and this culture. Like one of the exciting things about that scene in Jay and Silent Bob reboot to me was I got to let Brody talk about Marvel movies, which was something he never could do in 1995. In the Twilight of the Mallrats script, he gets to do that about like everything that like he hasn't been able to address in 25 years because he hasn't been in a movie or something like that, comes to bear in Mallrats as his world is crumbling. It's kind of like, Brody is Jor-El and the mall is Krypton. And I guess he's less Jor-El. He wants to stay on the fucking planet. Everybody else is Jor-El and Brody's trying to maintain. But he's got to accept the fact that, like, you got to put the baby in the rocket sooner or later.
So you're talking about Brody. What about people like Brandy Svenning, TS? Is LaFours going to make a return? I mean, what?
The whole cast list. Brody's back. TS comes back. Renee comes back. Willem comes back. Svenning comes back. Trish, the Dish, is back. Jay and Silent Bob are back. Brandy comes back. Is that everybody? I think I mean, literally, I was writing the movie. I kept looking at the poster and being like, all right, they got to come back. Like, if they're on the poster, they're familiar to the audience. And if they work into the story as well. And it was nice to be able to work everybody like into the story, like, and updated. Willem is kind of now LaFours. I don't even know if you've seen Ethan in real life, but he's fucking jacked. Like,
really?
Oh, he's ripped as fucking shit. So now he's become the mall security guard and stuff. Like everybody gets a role. And the story is like, it's not, I wouldn't say it's rooted firmly in reality, but it's completely plausible. Like, every movie should be heightened, right? Otherwise, you're just watching real fucking life. But at the same time, like for me, it's always important to make it like somewhat plausible. Like this could happen. Well, aside from Jay and Silent Bob swinging around on ropes and fucking Mallrats, like, Mallrats is plausible. Could happen. Shit like that. I tried to keep that with this as well. And the plausibility factor, like, this could happen. Like Jay and Silent Bob reboot, once you get in like the Russian terrorists and Iron Bob and bullets and shit like, then it becomes like a fantasy and stuff. But I'm not saying Mallrats is like, it's like Ken Burns' Civil War. But I'm saying it's like at least rooted in a reality that we all kind of see and understand. And then there are moments that heighten that reality. Jay and Silent Bob have the most heightened reality moments in all of Mallrats. Their shit is very absurdist that I came up with this time because I just spent a whole movie with them, so I didn't feel like I was going to overdo it with them in Mallrats. Particularly if you look at Mallrats, the original, they're you count the minutes they're in it. They're not in the entire fucking movie. They pop up as comic relief. So they function very much like that in Twilight of the Mallrats as well. And we don't like have a game show in the third act, but the third act has an event that brings everybody to the mall. I mean, the whole movie is quasi set at the mall for a reason. So it like a damn good reason, because otherwise nobody would fucking be there. So we just kind of compound, the kind of nutty nature of it, but it is still rooted in reality. It's not like Martians show up and Brody's got to take them out.
Oh man,
I know. I'm not that creative.
I want to ask you, I mean, I know Twilight, the Mallrats is your big thing you're working on right now. A couple weeks ago, you did announce some plans for Clerks 3.
Yeah.
I know you probably can't talk much about it, but I'm curious because you've said on record that and I totally agree, how beautiful and poetic the ending of Clerks 2 was. Mm-hmm. It was just a lovely ending. You said how that's how you wanted it to end, with that dolly shot, turns to black and white, you got the milkmaid. I mean, all that stuff. What made you kind of want to go back to Dante and Randall?
Oh, look, you can end a movie with a lovely shot and be like, that's good. But like, once Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back was meant to be the end of the Views universe, that's why God closes the book after the credits are all done. Atlantis pops up, closes the book, and it's like, we're done forever. And then like years later, when I went into Clerks 2, I wanted to grab Atlantis to open it up with her opening the book, because if you look very closely, and this is so stupid, but in Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, God closes the book at the end of the movie. But the book is halfway done. It's not like you got to the end of the book and shit. So I always left myself like this back alley of like, no, there's still more stories to tell. Clerks 2, I love that ending shot, and I love pulling into black and white. But the whole story of Clerks 2 is about like seizing your destiny. Like, I don't have to be somebody's employee. I could be my own boss and stuff like that, taking charge. But the last shot of Clerks 2 is very much like, be careful what you wish for, because like, you see them go like, we're going to do this, and this is what we need in life, and this will be everything. And then as the camera pulls back and shit just goes to black and white, you realize that like, was that the greatest decision they'll ever make? Like, that's what movies don't tend to do. Movies end on the note of like, this was great and everything will be great for all time. That shot communicates like, they went far. They got out of that place. And then their idea of victory was owning that place. And then they own it and they won. And then they're sitting there going like, did we? So that kind of leads into where we are in Clerks 3. In Clerks 3, we open with Randall having a massive heart attack. I told Jeff Anderson that, and he's like, where'd you get that idea? He had a massive heart attack. And when he's in recovery, Dante's there. And Randall's just like, I almost fucking died tonight. That was it. Like, I almost died. I'm 50 years old and I almost fucking died, and I have nothing to show for my life. What, I own a piece of a fucking convenience store in New Jersey? This is bullshit. He's going like, I wasted my entire life. I sat around watching movies my whole fucking life, never built anything. And when I die, who's going to fucking talk about me? I never got married like you did. I don't have a fucking kid and shit. I'm alone in this fucking world. And he goes, well, no more, man. As soon as I get out of this hospital, I'm going to go home and I'm going to write a fucking movie about my life, celebrating my fucking life, telling my fucking story. And we're going to shoot it in that fucking store, and you're going to help me. And so Dante and Randall essentially make Clerks. That's what Clerks 3 is about. How Dante,
oh my God, that's so exciting.
So that's the opening. And then from there on in, like, there's a lot of, there's ups and downs and epic shit happens. Like, that's what I like to do is stories, particularly in the Views universe, generally speaking, the Jay and Silent Bob stuff being exceptions, like exceptional stories about unexceptional people living in a very unexceptional world. Like, you don't look at a convenience store movie and go like, that'll have the answers and shit, but like, it did for a bunch of people. You don't look at the mall and go like, that'll fucking have a lot of answers, but for some folks it does. People that I love to write about, like me, when I started this job, came from places that don't normally get celebrated in the media. Like, I remember Siskel and Ebert, when they reviewed the movie, I think it was Roger Ebert, was just like, this is about a guy working at a convenience store. He's going, you go to the movies, they tell you stories about kings and fucking heroes and shit. You never see a story about some dude just working a job. And that impacted me. Like, when he said that in the review, I was like, yeah, that's what I do. I tell stories about people that have real jobs or weird jobs. Not like, it's never like, this motherfucker's the sexiest guy in the world. It's like, this guy is a comic book penciler and this guy is an inker. And if you don't know what that is, you're going to learn over the course of this movie and stuff. So I always felt like, because I came from a world of, for lack of a better description, interesting jobs. When you're making movies is not what I would call an interesting job. It's rarefied. It's like, it's for spoiled fucking adult children and shit like that. Working a real job, like when you're dealing with the public and stuff, like working at a convenience store, that's like reality. And that was my reality. And I thought that would be my reality my whole life. So when I wrote Clerks, it was me writing about my life to lionize my life, but never thinking that like, oh, okay, I'll wind up doing this more than once. I just wanted to do it fucking once. And that was like 26 years ago. But that's still baked into my DNA. And now that's not to say like, thank God there are filmmakers that don't base their shit in reality. Otherwise, we wouldn't have fucking Star Wars, right? Like George Lucas, his first movie, aside from THX 1138, which is a special sci-fi movie, but his first movie that everyone sees and he gets loot for and acclaim for is American Graffiti. It's a day in the life about the life he grew up living. It's his Clerks, for lack of a better description, his Dazed and Confused. But, of course, way better and way had a far deeper impact on the culture than anything I've ever done. Think about it. American Graffiti gave birth to fucking Happy Days. Somebody else is like, I'm going to do that as a fucking TV show, which gave birth to an entire industry of sitcoms, Laverne and Shirley, Mork and Mindy, so forth and so on. So at the end of the day, like having American Graffiti, like George Lucas with that big success, could have been like, all right, I'm going to make movies in Modesto about growing up and fucking being now the next stage of life or fucking blah, blah, blah. But instead, thank God, he was like, I want to make a movie about Wookiees and it takes place in fucking space. I'm going to use my imagination. I'm not one of those cats. I don't have a big imagination shit, nor do I have a lot of confidence in my ability to attract an audience to tell a story. So I never go like, let me put my shit in space. I generally go like, well, a mall, that's a big special effect. That looks like a movie, and I tend to in that direction.
Well, we're waiting on Boss Logic to hop on into the back room here. So Boss Logic, if you're watching, please hop on. You're up after Kevin. So I thought I'd take a second to sort of open up at least one or two questions from the live chat.
Let's do it. But let's get. I probably won't be here when it happens, but like that Boss Logic stuff. One of the simple joys of my life has been, particularly during the quarantine, jumping on Twitter and seeing him throw up designs for movies that don't exist, for movies that are about to exist. He did a poster for Doctor Strange 2 that I think had Brother Voodoo in it. And I was like, yeah. And we don't even know if Brother Voodoo's in the movie.
I don't know. Dreamcatcher and stuff hanging from it. Oh my God, it was so gorgeous.
I love other people's art. I can't draw for shit, and I'm no good with graphics. I'm about as good at drawing as I am at directing and shit. So I love when I could look at somebody's shit and it like grabs me where I'm like, oh, you can just get lost in an image like that. And then it's also so shareable too, where you send it to people and you're like, did you see fucking Brother Voodoo in this? It was very cool.
Yeah, well, we got the first one from Tim Balvance. Says, Kevin, what comic book film hasn't been made that you'd like to be involved with?
Oh, I don't know if I'd like to be involved. I love seeing these movies. I don't want to make those movies. That's hard. I've talked to people that make those movies. Sounds hard. Sounds very time consuming and shit like that. Plus, if you make one of those movies and then you fuck up, you're not allowed to talk about the rest of them. You know what I'm saying? Like I could be like, hey, I like the latest Batman. They'd be like, fuck you. You ruined the last Batman if you were that guy. So I never think about making those movies. That's my happy place. That's where I go to escape. Like when I'm like, I want to go to the movies, that's where I like to go. So I never look at them and go like, ooh, I want to do that, or I should be doing this. That being said, there is a comic book. That being said, I want to be in any Marvel movie. I don't care about making them. Put my fucking fat ass in a Marvel movie. They could see you, and that's all I care about. Like otherwise, you got to make that shit, and that seems hard. Talk to the Russo brothers. But a movie that somebody should make, I don't even need to be in it, but I think it would be a fantastic film. And the premise is made. Most comic book stuff is very much made for cinema or made for, presentation. It's fantasy. It's graphic, and they do things that you can't really do in the real world. That's why like seeing Spider-Man swing is so breathtaking, because you don't see that shit in the real world. They take that from a comic book page. That's a comic book notion. Even if somebody had web slingers, they probably couldn't go as fast as Peter Parker does and stuff. That's what makes it fun, the dream prospect. DC got a character called The Question, which I always thought was tailor-made for like a film noir, because at its center, you have a very inexpensive story of mystery, right? Like somebody did something to somebody else. You got to figure that out. And that's not a very costly movie to make. What you have going for you with The Question, though, what makes it catchy, its hook, is that Vic Sage or Renee Montoya, whoever you go with, take the face putty from his belt, the pseudoderm, spreads it on his face, releases gas from his belt. The pseudoderm affixes to his face, and suddenly he's featureless. That is cinematic. You can see that fucking scene. And if you're somebody committing a crime, or even if you're a good guy, and you turn around and some motherfucker's behind you with no face, you would lose your shit. More so than you would lose your shit if you saw a guy dressed like a bat. You'd be like, fuck a bat. This supernatural freak has no fucking features. I'm terrified. So I think you could do The Question very easily, and kind of like, the way they just Blumhouse did Invisible Man. Like that's a movie where it's not that expensive. I think the budget was like $7 million, because, you know, your big special effect in that movie is the suit when they eventually show it. But most of the time, it's the lack of anything in a frame that is the special effect. It's like you realize invisibility is the cheapest special effect on the planet. But the budget's kept low because it's not like there's constantly showing how the suit works or something like that. In the terms of the Question movie, you can do this shit with the face, 5 times total in a 2-hour movie, max? That's your only special effect. And also, this doesn't, the affixing to his face, probably CG. But you could also just make a fucking mask and then, rubber prosthetics like in the old days. And then, it's not even costly. It's not even costly on a CG level. Although I'm sure some CG person would tell you, like, erasing people's features, that's probably, cheap. I don't know.
I don't know. You saw Justice League. It's not easy to erase facial features.
It would look like a Henry Cavill mustache shot for like a whole movie long. That's the one that I'm rooting for. And I remember, I've been involved with DC over the years and stuff like that. Years ago, me and Jeff Johns were talking about doing a series for CW, and we met at DC with this cat Pornsack, and we would come up with the show, that what it would be. And the problem with making the show had everything to do with, at that point, it must be cleared up by now, but the rights to Rorschach. Since Rorschach was owned by DC and he was kind of quasi-based on The Question, and Charlton was owned by DC, but I guess some people were saying like, well, wait, that doesn't include it. For whatever reason, legally, they hadn't done that yet. Like it always... Like I was like, why isn't The Question in something? And it had something to do with tie up right. I mean, he's in the cartoon, don't get me wrong, but in a movie or something like that. So I don't know if they've cleared that up or something like that, but I honestly feel like, I get making Wonder Woman 84. Wonder Woman was a great movie. Like Patty Jenkins is amazing. The character's stellar, proven at the box office and stuff. And she's larger than life. She's a goddess. So of course you make that huge. You make a Question movie for under $10 million.
You're buying a ticket.
Who's not buying a ticket? I'm not saying everybody goes to every single comic book movie. We've seen that's not necessarily the case, but you got a strong brand behind it, the DC label and stuff. And if you cast that right, like somebody everybody loves, like Keanu Reeves or something like that, how does that movie not work? It's a cool concept, visually interesting. Just cast it right. It's home free. And then since, it's episodic, you could do a whole series of those. They don't even have to be expensive.
Great question. I forget even who asked that question in the comment section. Well, we got Boss Logic backstage. Kevin, we like to invite you back. We're here all day. We got Ming Chen on later on today. If you want to hop back in, we have an open invitation. We have the comic book man, Ming Chen.
One of my favorite comic book men, if not my absolute favorite.
You've got the link. Hop on anytime today if you're getting bored. I mean, everybody would love to have you on a panel. So hop on anytime you want. We're going to go ahead and give it up to Kevin Smith, guys. Give a big virtual round of applause. Kev, thanks so much. You're welcome all day long. Feel free to just hop on in.
Real quick before I go.
Yeah.
That moment in, it's Avengers Endgame anniversary. The moment where Captain Marvel gets knocked out and Tony looks all panicked. And then he looks to Doctor Strange, and Doctor Strange goes like that. What did that mean to you?
I'm afraid to open up this can, Kevin. I really am.
To me, and
that's it. I think you have to die in order to for everybody else to live.
See, all right, that seems to be how a lot of people have read it. I didn't read it that way. I read it as him going, remember that conversation where I said there's only one reality in which we beat this guy. This is it, and we just lost because Captain Marvel beat down and stuff. So I never read it as him going, this is it, you got to do something. I didn't see it as a call to arms. I saw it as a panic going, we're dead. We're absolutely dead. There's no hope at this point. I'm so curious what other people think.
Man, well, that'll be the recurring question throughout the day here at Mainframe Comic-Con. Kevin, thanks so much. You're welcome back all day long, guys. We're going to take just about a 60-second break as we queue up Mr. Boss Logic. We got a lot of great stuff for him, so stick around. More Mainframe Comic-Con all day long. Thanks, Kevin.
Bye.